Hello and welcome to another End User Talk podcast. I'm your hostess, Jamila, your lady in tech. Hello and welcome to the End User Talk podcast. I'm your host, Jamila, your lady in tech. And as always, we're bringing you some good, interesting, informative content. Today, we have with us Miss Raven Schwam-Curtis. Hey, Raven, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
You know what? One day at a time.
I feel that honestly. I got a little sinus infection today. I was at the clinic this morning. I'm trying to keep my spirits high, but these allergies are kicking my butt.
Oh, yeah. You know what? It's that time of year. So definitely they are invading and trying to make things a little bit more complicated for us, as if we don't have enough complications, right?
Right? Mm-hmm. No, I feel that.
Well, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. For those who may not be acquainted with you or familiar, do you mind giving us a brief introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Raven, aka Raven Reveals. I have been an academic my whole life, but kind of recently transitioned to working in social media and in the professional speaking business. I went to Cornell for undergrad, got my majors in Asian studies and feminist gender and sexuality studies. And then I just finished my master's in African American studies at Northwestern. And yeah, now I spend my days educating people online. While I was still finishing my master's degree, I started out on TikTok talking about the Black radical tradition and some of the things and topics that we were exploring in my classes. And it just started to pick up. And I kind of ended up delving later on into discussing my identity as someone who's Black and Jewish. And now I get to talk about intersectionality and coalition building and solidarity all day, every day, and be creative. So it's pretty cool. I'm really grateful to be able to do what I do.
Well, you know what? That is a vast resume of talents and abilities, and I'm so glad to have you here on the podcast to talk about your experience and expertise, and that's great.
Thank you so much. No, I poured blood, sweat, and tears into that thesis. You hear me? It was like 62 pages. It was double the length that needed to be. So I was burnt out after, but it was so worthwhile and so important. And I'm really grateful, that I had that dedicated space in my time to just think and read and talk to brilliant people.
And you know what? A thesis isn't anything to go into lightly. It can be life or the end of that hard work that you put in order to get your degree. So I'm proud of you and glad you were able to accomplish that goal. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Now, you actually covered some courses within your studies that are now being up for debate and possibly ending at the high school level. Being that you're in college or in a university level, do you think or do you feel that African American studies and studies like that are also next to possibly be ended on that chopping block?
Well, I certainly hope not. But I mean, I think the thing with making any kind of gains in the academic space is that those gains can be taken away at any moment. It wasn't that long ago that African American studies even became an established part of academic institutions. That was just back in the 60s. We're talking, maybe 60 years that this has been an established field. And we're still fighting to gain recognition and funding and, the accolades that are due to the folks who are doing really important intellectual and thought work. So do I think these fields could be next up on the chopping block? Ethnic studies, Asian American studies, Latina studies, AFAM, et cetera? For sure. But I think we are established enough now, and there are enough people who are politically, emotionally, and affectively invested in the work that we're doing that we're going to fight like hell if anyone tries to come for us in that way.
You know, African American Studies is I didn't realize that was actually a course that was available or offered. I used to watch, of course, It's a Different World. And I
Mhm.
remember a particular episode in there where Daryl was, or Ron, I'm sorry. Actually, I can't remember what his name was on the show. I think it was Ron. He actually could not graduate. He didn't get to graduate because he took an African American Studies course and they didn't count it as a credit towards his degree. And back then, I was like, wow, I didn't know that that was even a course available or it was an option to take to study at all, whether it was accredited or recognized as a credit. Just the fact that there was a course like that available blew my mind. But
Mhm,
to go a little further, the fact that African American history or African history is not considered a valuable enough course to count as a credit. And you mentioned other courses or races or ethnicities that also are considered an elective. I think, all of those ethnicities, all those cultures, all those individuals and their backgrounds contribute to what we call US history.
mhm,
And I think it's how can you have our US history without mentioning those other cultures?
mhm, most definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's the key point, and I think folks who are invested in, this anti-critical race theory rhetoric and even being anti-ethnic studies and all the other fields that we've kind of been discussing, they're more interested in telling a whitewashed version of who we are in this country, which is in fact not a reflection of who we are or what we're doing at all. And so I think that's why having these fields is so incredibly crucial because it adds more texture and truth and nuance the way that we understand ourselves and the people around us.
Now, with you, you mentioned that you are Black and Jewish. I don't know what your upbringing was like, and if you're okay to delve into that. But what caused you to be so involved or interested in taking on other histories, not just your own, or maybe your own? What caused you to get into this mode of trying to understand your own history and others?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think it really started for me in middle school and high school. I kind of was in environments where I felt like the histories and curriculum that I was being exposed to was incredibly Eurocentric. And I didn't quite have the language for it at the time because it was all that I was consuming. But once I got to college and I kind of had more exposure to folks from different walks of life and to different kinds of coursework, I realized that that was a personal lacking that I had, that I was only exposed or primarily exposed to these Eurocentric histories, and I couldn't be a fully fleshed out person if I didn't deeply commit myself to learning about the world writ large, not just a couple countries and couple peoples and cultures in it, right? And so, when I got to Cornell, I actually had a very different plan than what I ended up doing. I was planning to major in government, which is our version of like political science. I wanted to go to law school and become a civil rights lawyer. That was the plan. I was going to stay like very much pretty much solely rooted in the Black community and in the Black radical tradition. But then I got some really great advice my freshman year to not just take classes in the field that I thought I wanted to go into, but to also take classes in fields that just sounded interesting to me, or just take courses that sounded fun because I had plenty of time to explore. And I ended up taking some classes in the feminist gender and sexuality studies department my freshman year, and they just completely changed my worldview. I mean, it was a radical awakening. I read Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider for the first time my spring semester freshman year. And that was such an illuminating moment because I had never seen someone articulate so clearly on the page what it is that I had lived and experienced in my own life. And I think that's when I realized the power of like thinking deeply on the page and reflecting on life and livability, like what does it mean to translate our experiences into a digestible, understandable thing on paper in a book. It was just kind of a rattling phenomenon to me. And yeah, I just decided I was going to completely change my course and not become a government major, that I wanted to delve more into feminist gender and sexuality studies, think more about Black feminist thinkers like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks. And along the way, I also ended up becoming very interested in Asian studies because I took a class that was cross listed with gender studies and Asian studies. And that was super cool because then I'm thinking about queerness and feminism in the context of Asia. That was never something that I had been exposed to. And, I had studied Chinese in high school. I continued my studies of Chinese in undergrad. And I just decided that I was going to dedicate my undergraduate experience to learning about the histories and peoples that I hadn't been exposed to and to my liking or enough maybe prior. And then I also ended up double minoring in inequality studies, which is basically sociology and in Africana studies. So that's really what I dedicated my undergraduate years to, and it was very personally fulfilling. And I feel like I'm a better person for it.
Now, as far as now, all of the studies, your coursework, and how has that impacted you personally? I'm gonna let that be my first inquiry, and then I'll ask my second part of that. But with all of your coursework and studies, how have they impacted you personally?
Mm. Oh goodness, that's a big question. I mean, I think first and foremost, my studies, particularly in college and grad school, made me realize for the first time that school wasn't necessarily just this thing that I did to receive good grades to then feel good about myself, that school and learning and reading and thinking could be a way to better know myself and the people around me, like a way to deeply enrich my life, to completely change the way that I look at the world around me. And I think one of the most powerful things that I took out of my time in undergrad was being exposed to Black feminisms. I mean, that's still a political ideology that is so, so central to how I move through the world, and women of color feminisms and coalition building and solidarity. Like, even now, the work that I do online, so much of it is oriented around those particular politics in conversation with thinkers like Angela Davis and Audre Lorde, as I mentioned, Bell Hooks, so on and so forth, Roxane Gay. So yeah, I would say my studies have impacted me primarily because they've radically changed my politics.
You know what? You actually answered the second part of my line of questioning. So that's I kind of figured you would lead me to that. So that was great that you basically answered two questions in one. You know what? With someone who is as well versed and well spoken and studied as yourself, I have three daughters of my own, and they're all young adult women, and you taking advantage of the coursework that you've selected, female studies. And sometimes you go off to school and you're not sure. A lot of people don't know what their path is. I don't know what I want to do. I'm really confused about where I fit in this world and in this society. And as African Americans, Black, however you identify yourself, it makes it doubly hard for you to be able to, one, you've gotten through your formal studies and training, you get to high school, and a lot of us are just kind of like, we don't have access to a lot of the resources, and there's not a lot of discussion about, all of these extended or thinking outside of the box careers. And we're kind of, as African Americans, we're kind of stuck to this servitude box. You can teach, you can play sports, or you can serve other people in the service industry. Nothing's wrong with any of those things, but because of our lack of exposure, it's kind of hard for you to see or paint yourself in a picture that often excludes you. So if you are able to graduate from high school, everyone's expectation is that your next logical step is going to be college. But
Mm,
I barely made it through high school.
that's real. That's
I
real.
exactly. And it's like, I love having these discussions because, I grew up in an era where, yes, the natural trajectory was either college or going to the military.
Mhm.
And everybody's not suited for those things.
Mhm.
But we want to have a piece of that American pie, that American dream. What advice do you have for someone who's actually going through that? And again, I think it's a little bit more challenging for some people of color. How would you advise or guide someone?
In their pursuit of the American dream.
Which route they should take? What do I need to what would if I don't think college necessarily is for me, or if college is,
Mhm.
I'm not sure what I wanna do.
Mm. Well, I think that's incredibly normal. I don't think anyone who's 17, 18 years old really knows what they want to do for the next 50, 60 years of, 50 years of their lives. So first and foremost, I would say if you're feeling uncertain about your path in life, then that's kind of how you're supposed to be feeling. I think it's the oddball who kind of like knows what they want to do. That one person that you've known forever in high school who's like, I'm going to be a doctor. And then they spend the next 10 years becoming a doctor. Like that doesn't happen very often. So being in the process of discovery is kind of how you come to know yourself in this life. And so I would say relish that and lean into that as opposed to feeling frustrated with it or uncomfortable with the sentiment. And then in terms of whether it makes sense for you personally to go to college or not, I mean, there are so many factors that go into that, right? I mean, if we're talking about the Black community in America specifically, there's so many ways that we have been historically, socioeconomically, politically, culturally disadvantaged and marginalized. Not because of anything inherently wrong with us. We're a wonderful, thriving, beautiful community, but because of anti-Black racism in this country. And college is very expensive. And depending on your situation, you may or may not have financial access to college. So first and foremost, I would say that there should be no shame around not being able to have access. But if you can have access and it feels like a good fit for you, then go for it. You know, I think it's about trusting your life, trusting your intuition, seeking guidance from the elders around you who have your best interests at heart, and knowing that even if you make a decision that ends up not being the best decision, you can always change course. Like, say you end up going to college and you get 2 years in, you're like, you know what? I'm not enjoying this. I'm really unhappy. I think I want to start my own business and be an entrepreneur. Cool. Awesome. You can leave with your associate's degree after those 2 years and do your thing. Like nothing, not nothing, but very few things in this life are permanent. There's always an option to change your mind. I mean, you can be 40 or 50 and decide that you want to go to school. All these things are options. So yeah, my biggest, all of that summarized would be to trust your life.
I think that's great advice. I think that's wonderful advice because, you are correct, and you might go in thinking having one ideal or have a goal set, and life is always going to give you some twists and turns. And I guess the main thing is it's okay to have a plan. It's okay not to have one. Oftentimes we try to plan out things and something else can come in and redirect or completely change it. So it's okay. You're not a failure. You're not slow. You're moving at the pace in the direction your life and your path is supposed to take accordingly. And, we hear this thrown around all over social media, to trust the process.
Mhm.
And that takes faith within itself, and just, sticking to just trust the process, just stick to it, whatever it is. If it changes, fine. You can be resilient and get back on path, whatever that path is for you. But thank you. I appreciate that. I think that will resonate with a lot of people at whatever stage of life or even age that they're in. Perfect answer. Okay. So you take a lot of what you've learned and what you've studied, and I'm sure life experience as well, to social media. The topic of discussions that you have, those topics are very, I would say, it ruffles some feathers.
Yeah, it really does.
And, one who goes to social media or uses their platform to talk about disparities of all kinds, of all types and all sorts that affect a myriad of individuals. How do you handle with the backlash that you may get? I'm sure you get some pats on the back and some encouragement as well, but how do you handle those individuals who, whether they're trolling or they're just being completely rude to the points that you're trying to make? How do you handle that?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like this is an important thing to talk about for anyone who is interested in going into a career in social media, because you could be saying or doing the most benign, apolitical thing, and there will always be folks who find a reason to dislike you or critique you, let alone someone like me who goes to the internet to educate and speaks about being Black and Jewish and part of the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, pick your poison. Like, there's any number of reasons that people could choose to dislike me, and that's not even considering what it is that comes out of my mouth or what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's tough sometimes. I think I've grown more resilient the longer that I've been working in social media. I'm coming up on 2 years now in this industry, so things don't land quite as intensely as they used to when I started out. One feature that I take hefty advantage of is filtering out keywords that may show up over and over again that are really hurtful or harmful. So, for example, if someone calls me a mutt for being multiracial, like mutt is a word that's filtered out on all my platforms, half breed is filtered out, bedwench is filtered out, any kind of iteration of the K word, which is a slur against the Jewish community, is filtered out. The gorilla emoji is filtered out. The rat emoji is filtered out. Like all these different things that have kind of been weaponized against me, I just filter it out so I don't have to see it in the first place because that is just better for my well being and mental health. I mean, if people leave nasty comments, sometimes I think part of also protecting your mental health when you work in this industry is maybe not looking at your comments after a certain point. For the first hour after I post a new piece of content, I will engage with the people who are commenting and reposting like very intentionally. And then after that, I kind of stop going to the comments because that's when it starts to get a little dicey. Normally, that first hour is people responding who really support what you're doing and they're on board or they want to have generative dialogue. And then after that, it kind of circulates to different places on, in the algorithm and on the platform that aren't necessarily as gracious. So I just don't look at my comments after that first hour to be self-protective. And then, yeah, other than that, the block button is used on a regular basis, I would say. Like if someone is really, really inappropriate in my comments, I'll just block them because I wouldn't want that person to, also attract other folks who have similar sentiments to my page. So those are a few of the things I do to protect myself, but it's the internet and kind of the blessing and the curse of working in that space is that you can reach a lot of people, but that also means a lot of people can reach you. And folks don't always have good and loving intentions.
You know what? I was not aware of all of those different ways of those individuals bypassing some of the built-in features or filters that should block out negative. I was not aware of that. That is, man, if people really want to get to you and get under your skin, they really and truly can, and they do all types of things to get around the security filters or those the triggering words and the no words. That is wow. You know what? I've spoken to a few gamers, and most of them are Black women, and they talk about the difficulties that they have a lot of times being a woman first, and then adding being African American or a woman of color to these spaces, all of the hate that they get.
Mhm.
And to me, you're playing a game, and this is social media. I feel like one should be able to get on these platforms and express themselves, but in a positive manner, in an uplifting manner. And I don't know sometimes these individuals out here who, whether or not they're truly being trolls and they're just trying to get something going, or if they really and truly believe in the things, the hate that they're spilling. Everyone, I suppose, has a right. Well, not suppose, everyone does have a right to their opinion, and we do have the freedom of speech, but some of this content, a lot of it is so divisive and so hateful. It's also it gets to a point to where it's like I don't like going on social media.
Mhm.
I don't like seeing these things, and it's a not a reflection of me, but it's targeted towards me a
Mhm.
lot of times. As a multiracial woman, what has your or are there any experiences that you've had or you continue to have
Mhm.
that have, I don't want to say complicated, but have kind of, well, one, make you sad or make you feel as if, when can I just be a person? When can I just be accepted as me?
Hmm. I mean, every day, every day, I think because I talk so much about being Black and Jewish, that opens me up, unfortunately, to a lot of critique around my identities. I've experienced a tremendous amount of pain and rejection from both of the communities that I belong to. I mean, so obviously, colorism is a very real phenomenon. And, my mom optically has a darker complexion than me. My dad is like red in the world as a white dude. And I do have a lighter complexion. And so I have tremendous privilege moving through the world in that sense because I don't know that people always recognize that I'm Black. I mean, I have really big curly hair, so they probably think I'm ethnic at the very least, but I don't know that people always recognize that I'm Black. And, I get a lot of comments around that. And obviously, I'm self aware that I have a lighter complexion, but that doesn't mean that I'm not culturally Black. That doesn't mean that I wasn't raised by a Black woman. That doesn't mean that I don't care deeply about Black folks and the Black radical tradition and equity, racial equity, gender equity, all these things. So that's hurtful sometimes when some folks in the community are like, well, why are you speaking on this? You don't even look Black. And I'm like, well, yes, like if we want to have a conversation about colorism, that's one thing. I'm always down to have that conversation. I'm always down to talk about privilege and inequity. Like that's what I study. That's what I do. But to say that someone who looks like me can't speak on these topics simply because of optics that I cannot control feels frustrating to me because I definitely wouldn't be the first light-skinned Black woman to talk about the Black freedom struggle. Angela Davis, for example, right? And which is not me saying I'm Angela Davis, let's be clear, but like we exist. Obviously, the Black community, we come in all different shades and colors. And then on the Jewish side, I'm a patrilineal Jew, which basically just means that I'm Jewish via my father. And many Jewish people in the community do not recognize patrilineal Jews as valid Jews. Traditionally, you have to be matrilineally Jewish, so Jewish through your mom, to be considered truly Jewish, which there's a whole history that I won't get into behind that. And it makes sense why historically that was the way Jewish identity was conferred, because obviously, if the baby is coming out of the birthing person, if the birthing person is Jewish, the baby is Jewish. There were no paternity tests back in the day, right? But now we do have paternity tests. And so I get a lot of flack around being a patrilineal Jew. I also get a lot of flack around the fact that I was raised in a single parent household. My mom raised me by herself. And, so culturally, I was raised Black. I wasn't really raised Jewish at all growing up. It wasn't until college that I even started to really intentionally and consistently connect with a Jewish community. And that's been amazing. But also, some people don't think I'm really Jewish because I wasn't raised Jewish. And so the fact that I'm encountering it later in life is an issue for folks. So, like I said, pick your poison when it comes to me. But of course, those things are hurtful. And at the same time, there are people in both communities who wholeheartedly embrace and love me. And I want to be in community with people who want to be in community with me. So that's kind of where I've landed with it.
The problem with our communities, and I'm talking about all communities of people, is that we are so stuck on judging someone based on what we see.
Mhm.
And, that is such a flawed ideology, a flawed thought process to look at someone and one, tell them you aren't this, you aren't that, or you're not enough of this and you're not enough of that. And to size me up or size an individual up based on what we see.
Mhm.
I don't know that that's something that is curable. It's going to take a lot of conscious practice and exercise for us to, one, get rid of this thing that we're looking at someone and making a deciding factor on that person's worth, whether or not that person belongs, before we give them an opportunity or before we give ourselves and the other person an opportunity to know one another
Mhm.
and to, my granddaughter is biracial. She's Black and Hispanic, or Black and Mexican, and she's going to have these obstacles to face, whether it's within her family or within the individuals who she encounters through her walk of life. I mean, she's only 2, or she will be 2, but I think about those things. I've had my daughters that I've had to deal with these things. And, I have 3 daughters, and 2 of them are browner or darker skinned, and my middle daughter is lighter skinned.
Mhm.
She doesn't consider herself lighter skinned. But, things like that happen in families.
Mhm.
When you have a gene pool and DNA that stretches to the beginning of time, the beginning of tree creation, you don't know what's going to come up in your mixture of 2 people coming together.
Mhm.
So My sentiments to you and the Black community, we can be harsh sometimes on our own instead of being welcoming. It's the skin, the colorism. Sometimes women are not always accepting of other women. It's always a competition.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter how you slice it, it's a competition.
For
But
sure.
it's I'm so
Mhm.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I mean, I do think there's some validity, right? Folks who in the Black community who have a darker complexion, like there is a history of folks in the Black community who have a lighter complexion or who are white appearing, like choosing to be white passing. And I think there's a real frustration and distrust and historical like grounding in some of these like fractures that we see around colorism in our community. And at the same time, none of us can control what our skin color is. None of us can control what we look like in the world. So, what would it look like to not draw divisions based on you having a lighter complexion and me having a darker complexion, and instead imagine community based on what our politics are? So, regardless of what you're looking like your politics like my politics? If they are, we're cool. If your politics are not like my politics and you believe in this weird colorism hierarchy, then you're not my people, regardless of what you look like. And I think for me, that's kind of what it boils down to.
You know what? I would like to say that that's something that's only occurring in the Black community, but we know colorism happens in a lot of communities.
Oh,
We've got, colorism within the Afro Latino community. We've got
absolutely.
colorism and I don't want to say this wrong, but West Indian or the Asian communities. There's so much colorism and so many people who are being set apart because they don't have the right skin hue, the skin color, or hair texture. And we know that people, it's not just you being a darker complected individual that causing you to be treated or mistreated. We know that sometimes lighter skinned people can be, or fair skinned people. You could be being isolated because of the texture of your hair.
Mhm.
I just feel as if, it's time for us to get to a point to where we're not so superficial. We're not continuing to hurt one another. And there is a lot of hurt there. And I'm not by no means am I trying to exclude the hurt on both sides of the house.
For
What
sure.
all I'm saying is that I believe we have, as you've mentioned, there are some things about us that are similar. I can like another person. I can get along with another person. I can relate to another person well beyond their complexion or their hair texture.
Mhm.
Our conversation, the fact that you like the same anime shows that I enjoy. The fact that, you know what? You play pretty good at this sport or you like this sport or this particular activity. Or you know what? I like you because you don't. Opposites still attract. That rule still applies. And I just think that we have bigger fish to fry, as they say. And we as a people have to stop being so divisive. One person's complexion, one person's hair texture does not make them greater or less than.
Mhm. That's it.
Or, right, more capable or less capable, or more deserving or less deserving. One's gender should not be it's such a taboo. And we as women, there's so many taboos and so many things. We have to get rid of this dichotomy and this practice of seeing our another woman as our competition.
Mm, I
We
agree.
we have to be supportive. Now, in the studies that you took about the female studies, and please forgive me if I didn't name that course correctly,
Oh, fine.
is are those some of the things that are covered within that coursework?
To some extent, I think a lot of the stuff that I studied was, well, yeah, it was about mutual uplift, and Audre Lorde, to your point about women uplifting and celebrating one another, in Sister Outsider, she talks a lot about homophobia within the Black community and how she, as a lesbian, Black lesbian poet, to be more specific, that's how she self describes her being a Black lesbian, that she's experienced a lot of homophobia from Black women who are straight right? And her expressing frustration around like that. Like there's so many different axes and identity categories through which we can be hostile or unkind to one another. But if we are willing to hold all of each other fully, wholly, like accept all of one another, then I think that would get rid of so much of the divisiveness that we're naming in this conversation. But all these prejudices and misconceptions continue to, to live on in how we relate to one another. And it's really unfortunate.
I was looking, the Little Mermaid premiere came out, and I was just, I've had this discussion or conversation with my daughters. You know, you've got fictitious or fictional characters in a book, a story, and we bring it to film, and it's a sad day when a fictional character being cast as anything black
Hmm.
is scrutinized.
Yeah.
They don't exist.
Right.
This was, now, you might hear some people say, well, truth be told, mermaids were in the tropical areas. So, to be honest with you, if a mermaid was going to be any color or any complexion, they would have been a darker complexion.
Hmm.
If we go back from historical storytelling accounts.
Right.
So, this idea, and I just there's just such an assault on black people playing any role or any part in anything,
Mhm.
even if it isn't real. It stirs so much anger and unrest. I just My mind is blown, and it's like, where do black people, where will you be okay with us being? Will
Mm.
you ever be satisfied? It's like our pure existence, you're seething mad because we just purely exist.
Mm.
So where can we go? Where will we be accepted? And my answer, or at least from what I've seen and just in history, anywhere black people were, there was just no one, certain people were not going to be happy, even if we were segregated. You think about all of the communities that were burned down or flooded. These black people were living on their own, to their own, thriving amongst themselves. But because they were living, and you couldn't understand we took everything. They don't have anything. How is it that they're doing better than me, or that they're doing it all? And you go and destroy it.
Mm.
So it's as if, sometimes feel as if, I don't know if, slavery will ever be a thing again. And clearly there are people out there who would love to see that happen. But sometimes I get to a point to where it feels as if they won't be satisfied unless we just weren't existing at all.
Mm. Well,
Secondly,
yeah.
if we weren't existing,
Mhm.
I always go back to who's next?
Mm. Mm.
Who's going to take our place?
Right. That's so interesting. I mean, I feel like part of the interesting, I don't know if it's a paradox, maybe that's not the right word, but the interesting aspect of whiteness is that whiteness can only make itself legible by measuring itself against what it's not. And that's blackness, right? So I don't know. I feel like if black folks suddenly like we blinked and it was like a Thanos, snap thing and all black people just disappear from the earth, I feel
Mhm.
like another subjugated group would have to be created to continue to uphold this idea of like racial superiority. Like that superiority doesn't exist without someone else being deemed inferior. It's kind of like it's a dialectic, I don't know. It's really interesting. And I mean, to your earlier point about, slavery, or it feels like there's this desire, like among maybe like the heavily right. Well, I don't know. We don't have to get into the whole political, like Republican Democrats of it, but it feels like there's a desire among white nationalists. I'll say that for something, if not slavery, something akin to slavery, like a very staunch racial hierarchy. And some scholars in Black studies would argue that slavery never ended, or at the very least, the afterlife of slavery continues to live on in the form of mass incarceration. I mean, Black people are disproportionately incarcerated and policed and brutalized. Obviously, this is a conversation that has come to the fore since the summer of 2020 and everything that erupted around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and countless others. But it's, I mean, it's so deeply true. Like, what does it mean to live in a world where we have kind of a legalized form of enslavement? I don't know. That might be a hot take. I'm thinking very much with the book, The New Jim Crow. But there are many ways that the afterlife of slavery continues to live on and impact all of us, both in deeply material ways like mass incarceration, but also in psychological ways, right? Like, how is white supremacy living on in all of our minds and hearts and psyches and impacting how we view ourselves, how we view other people? That's real, and that's not always as tangible.
I mean, you're correct, and to be perfectly honest, the answer to that is very it's right before us. Throughout history, you know, that's all that they've ever done is conquer, destroy, and take, and take as their own, if you will. Clearly, that is a story of another day, but I don't believe that even if we didn't exist, that they'd be satisfied and there would be no such thing as white supremacism.
Mm,
I do not believe that, and I believe that because they don't like anyone, not even themselves or people who oppose their ideology or their thought process. And that's why I think it's very, very important for individuals who are sitting in the corner and saying that that is a Black problem, that is their issue, or stay out of it because the attention is not on us. If we get involved, then we'll be a part, then they'll look at us. I believe it is very, very important for us all to stand together. And that's why I say that we're looking at all of these superficial and these unnecessary differences for us to prop ourselves up for whatever reason.
mm,
Everybody cannot be on top. But if we all find our own appreciation, value, celebrate ourselves for our own differences, that applies to you as an individual person. It also applies to us as a community because our experiences are unique, they are different, they can be shared, some aspects of it can be shared collectively, whether that be cultural, whether that be genetic, whether that be gender wise. There are some things that we do share collectively, but it is very, very important for us all to not try to find ways to puff ourselves up
mm,
by stepping on someone else.
mhm. I
We
agree.
we could go on and on with this, but, I'm gonna wrap this up. It has been a true pleasure speaking with you today, Raven. I appreciate you for all of your words of wisdom. I know you are a young woman, and you're getting out here, and you're being very bold, first and foremost. I would have to say that you're being both Black and Jewish. You have 2 uh I don't want to say ethnicities, but you know what, you got a double-edged sword going on there, right?
Don't I know
um
it?
and being a woman, because these two groups, there are a lot of people that don't like these groups separately, but to be combined, that's a heavy weight on your shoulders. And I would have to say that outside of your mother doing whatever she was as a single mother, a single parent, raising a biracial daughter, I believe she gave you a good foundation, and hats off to your mom for
Oh,
helping you. And in addition, you growing up and trying to figure out, how do I make this thing better? How do I make life better? How do I not look at other people the way people look at me,
mm,
and avoid self-hate? Because, a lot of people hate who they are because of how they're treated.
mm.
So a pat on your back and kudos. Continue doing what you're doing. I found you, I believe, on TikTok. I don't recall if it was TikTok or Instagram, and You are the type of young woman and the example that I want my daughters to be able to look upon despite maybe we don't our colors may not match, but you are going through experiences that they go through.
Mm,
They can relate in that regard because there are things that you are going through that we think only impact us. But when you're able to hear someone else with a platform like yours share what you're going through and try to educate, try to empower, try to, soothe some of the pain and the hurt and the discomfort that we go through trying to navigate this life.
mm,
We need that. And you are the type of the message that you're sending, no matter how many feathers it does ruffle or how many people are angry or how many people try to keep you quiet. We need to hear this.
mm,
So I thank you for using your platform, for using your personal experiences, for sharing. Someone needs to hear it. A lot of people need to hear it. People are struggling with a lot of things, and your words are necessary, your example, your influence. And I want you to continue doing what you're doing. Don't stop. And clearly, you'll do it. You'll find other ways to be influential in other ways. You're very intelligent, and I know that your future is bright. And keep up the good work. Keep it up.
thank you. I so appreciate all of your kind words, and that's so lovely to hear from a mother that I'm the kind of example that your daughters would want, because that's how I try to move through the world, right? Like, part of creating a world where we're not divisive, a world where we're not trying to step on one another to get higher up ourselves. It requires that we love and care for one another deeply, that we radically reimagine what the world can be. So if I can play one small part in that, then I'll be very happy.
Well, thank you. And I want other people to be able to hear your words and experience you on their own terms. So, where can we find you? And if you have any projects or whatever you want us to know about you, please, this is your opportunity to thank, shout out, and let us know where to find you. This is your time.
Amazing. Yeah. So y'all can find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter at Raven Reveals. That's RAVENREVEALS. I also am a professional keynote speaker. So if you're interested in bringing me to your organization to talk about Black and Jewish relationality, true care versus performative allyship, Afro Asian solidarity, or Juneteenth, you can head to my website, ravenreveals.com. And I'd love to work with you.
All right, y'all, please don't miss the Raven experience. Visit Raven Reveals everywhere she is. Raven, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. And have a great rest of your day and a great summer.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
Thank you. We've come to the close of another episode of the End User Talk podcast. I hope that what you've heard today will leave you feeling empowered. Thank you for listening. And remember, every day's a training day.